Welcome to the 2-month review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take a single book, break it down bit by bit, section by section, talk about it, analyze it, have fun, make jokes. This season, we are doing The Remembered Part by Rodrigo Frazan, the third book in his trilogy, and the longest, and the one that's going to take us the longest to get through, and absolutely wonderful. And I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined this week by Florida man Patrick Smith.
Hey, how's it going?
Formerly Vermont man Patrick Smith.
Yeah, I don't think I'm quite Florida man yet.
Has anything changed in your recent time that you've been spending now that you live and work in Florida? Has anything changed about your outlook?
I
Do you hate
appreciate you a lot more.
You what's that?
Appreciate you instead of thank you. That's a big thing. So I definitely do that now. I did literally say I'm fixing to, and I didn't enjoy that. I really didn't enjoy that entering my vocabulary. But Tanner.
Tanner?
Tanner.
Still gonna go into like nice wilderness.
Yes, that's honestly like the best thing going here is tons of state parks, just tons of land. I went down to the Everglades in February, and the best thing I've bought since I've been here is the state parks pass. State parks are usually like $3 to $6 to go, and year pass was like 20 something bucks, and you can just go and go and go and go.
Oh, nice.
Like right near where I live, there's springs. I live on this weird private land area that I can walk to the Santa Fe River, which is nice. I don't go in it, but my dogs want to go in it, so that's nice. Get them out of the heat.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So not too bad.
No, I mean, honestly, as long as I have decent nature to get out into, I can probably survive.
And big, long books to occupy your free time.
Yeah, definitely big, long books to occupy my free time. The little free time I have, but yeah.
You, friend, are probably the only person, I suspect the only person, who re-listened to all of the podcasts of the...
I didn't cover all of the Dream Part podcast. I gave up midway through because I had to catch up on the Remembered Part.
Well, you came close. You attempted to listen to all of the rerunning of the Invented Part and Dream Part podcast and reread both of the books in preparation for joining this season of the 2-month review, pinch hitting like you are today, to talk about this week's section, which goes from the beginning of part 2, which I believe is page like 354, 355, up to page 422. So we're getting into the second section, which we'll talk about in a second. But what was it like you said you reread the books a couple times. What was it like rereading them now and leading into this third volume?
It's funny, so I've read Invented Part 4 times and Dream Part 3 times now. And you'd think I'd have a stronger sense of them and where things happen in them. And in terms of, I can break down what sections each book has and the little stylistic chunks each book has, and have a good sense of when plot things happened, when we find out certain things about Penelope or he cannot be named or the young man or whatever. But especially in this one, I read lines where I'm like, okay, this is a revisiting of a line. I don't remember which book it's from. Everything is the way he just revisits and revises and goes back to and references and then expands on a reference. I really lose track of when any of those things occurred in the first place. There's a line in the Invented Part where it's something like that. This book could only be written with a word on word, because it's obvious that when he's doing his 7 sections that book was separated into, that he is control finding to see where things line up. And then what do you got, buddy? Leave it. And then I feel like you can only read. I want to read them where I can actually control find and search, and better than just me sitting here being like, okay, it was in this part of this page and somewhere in the book and trying to find it. Because especially in this one, there are whole scenes that I'm like, that cropped up before, and I'm not sure how much this is exactly the same and how much he's added to it, or how much things have actually just been revised and remembered differently. So I'm almost more confused in some ways.
There are versions of this that are ebooks that are searchable, but also we have PDFs that we could send you
Yeah.
do
I've
that.
thought about asking. The ebooks I'd have to, I guess buy another one or have a reader or whatever. But yeah, I wouldn't mind PDFs.
Yeah, that would make it a little bit easier, I bet. So what do you, I mean, obviously you've reread it this many times. You love Raison, you love the books, but what is your feeling? This is the first time that you're reading the remembered part.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think of that so far in contrast to the other two?
I mean, it's different. He's definitely doing a different thing, but it's also the same. It's the same reason I love it. It inspires me to like think a little better in my life and remember a little bit better in my life, and just kind of be more excited about not just literature, like not just okay, I want to finally get back to reading things that I really care about, but also like, oh, just movies are fun and TV's fun and music's great. I know it wasn't necessarily inspired by this, but yesterday I listened to iTunes 90s alternative mix, like just to like remember things like Eve 6. Like that's the thing, a line from an Eve 6 song popped into my head. I don't even remember why, but it just entered my head, and then I wanted to remember the rest of the song and I couldn't. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna listen to this fucking song. And then after that, I was like, okay, I just want to listen to more of these songs. And like Stone Temple Pilots came up, and I'm like, okay, now I'm having intense memories of like raiding my sister's room and stealing her music and listening to Stone Temple Pilots when I was in like middle school or whatever. So you just kind of really what?
STP.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has reignited a little passion for these type of things that had been a little dead. And the invention part did the same thing. I think the dream part, I was still kind of feeling inspired and passionate by things, and so I didn't necessarily kick that into overdrive because it was already there. But yeah, I mean, that's what gets me going with these books, really. And so much of it is how my brain works. Like my brain's constantly like reaching out for references and connecting to things, and it's nice to see someone doing it on a masterful artistic level rather than just an idiot with an ADHD brain.
It's funny that you mentioned the music thing, because one of the last lines from this section that I marked was towards the end where it's talking about collages, and the collages in art form and on the various Beatles songs and whatnot, and then all those voices and sounds and howls and laughter and alarm clocks and all those fucking phone conversations on the albums of Pink Floyd, which reminded me of this song that I think I'm going to use at the beginning and end of this that's totally different, by DJ Seinfeld, that has a voice memo in the middle that's really like really precious and sort of fits into like the kind of that sort of thing as well.
Like every like opener to that indie like Midwestern emo album, like every Bright Eyes fucking album has like a big long phone conversation or recorded something at the beginning. You're like, okay, dude, it was kind of interesting the first time. Now that I know your album's going to start with this, I'm kind of like, why?
I've been doing a different for 3%, which is sort of evolving into something much larger and more apropos of like Context Magazine from the past. I've been writing things for it, which we could talk about later, and running excerpts. And one of the books that we just ran an excerpt from, and that is because I just finished proofing it, is Zoo or Letters Not About Love by Victor Shklovsky. And part of that book involves a running metaphor about telephones, and telephones as being annoying and complicated devices in one's life, because he's writing letters over and over again to this woman he's in love with because she won't talk to him on the phone. So
that's not a good sign of where your relationship is at, probably legally.
She also tells him several times that he's pretty shitty at writing love letters, and not to talk to her about love, and to quit. So he's not very, it's not going well. It's definitely not going well, but nevertheless. But the telephones are all over the place right now, and the things I'm reading. But so this section, is there anything you wanted to say about? This is one other big question for you. Anything you wanted to say about dumb shit that we said on the past podcast that needs to be corrected or deserves to be mocked or ridiculed? And then secondly, anything you want to say about the first part of this volume, the whole airplane section?
No, I don't think there's any dumb shit. I think there was one point, I think it was it's this season where Brian couldn't remember that I guess he looked it up or while he was on. Couldn't remember that William Shatner was in the Something on the Wing Twilight Zone episode, and as a Star Trek guy, that I was like, come on, like pull it together, because you guys are doing it. What he realized that you guys are saying it in the William Shatner way without realizing who's William Shatner, which is pretty entertaining.
That's funny. Yeah, I'm not a Star Trek person. Every time there's a Star Trek clue on the New York Times crossword puzzle, I get pissed. Like there's like 4 options I know, and if those don't fit, then I'm like, God damn it! Now I have to figure this out through the other bits. But anyway, so nothing stupid we said, but nothing you have to add about the airplane section.
No, I mean I could just try to add things everywhere, but no, I mean I think the question of what the typewriter voice is an interesting one, and that kind of applies to the section in that it folds in pretty intensely. And like, yeah, I think that's an overall interesting one. Like I looked back last night briefly at the dream part to confirm that like the typewriter voice is heavy in the beginning of that one, the first section, and then after that it's like pretty gone. And it kind of does strike me that the voice is kind of a little different, or it works a little differently in each of the books. It is almost like the first one, the voice is inventing, and the second one, the typewriter voice is dreaming, and the third one, up until now, it's remembering. You know, in that airplane section, it definitely seems like the typewriter voice is expounding and expanding on what the other voice is doing. Like they're going in the same direction, saying similar things, but then the typewriter voice just says more and a lot and bigger and remembers more. And then now in this section, he just says now the remembering is going to be in the normal voice.
Yeah, I think that's true too. I still think it's like a back and forth between kind of one's own voices, but I don't think it really matters what the interpretation is. It's sort of like a fun way to like have a conversation without characters.
Yeah.
If anything else, it also ties in a little bit. I don't think I sent this to you, but so there is a reference in here to Piglia's The Last Reader.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 articles about that written by Adam Thirlwell. One that's in The Guardian, and one that's in an expansion of it, I believe, that's in the New York Review of Books. And the whole thing, actually, the way that he writes about it really does describe something that's very much Freyson-esque. Trying to find the right way to kind of capture this, but here's kind of his bit. So the Thirlwell starts his essay by talking about like the anxieties that govern the art of the novel. One of them is about the reader in particular. And he reads a sad essay called The Last Reader by the Argentine novelist Ricardo Piglia, in which he sketches a theory of reading through chapters describing various readers, such as Kafka's Felice or Che Guevara. As he read the book, he starts to figure out other things. And he says that it was very unsettling. Think about it. Just take the most famous novelistic characters, Don Quixote and Madame Bovary. Both of them misread to the border of insanity. Or Catherine Morland in Northanger Abbey, or Anna Karenina. It's sad, but it's obviously true. Novelists seem to hate readers. The deep model of a reader, writes Piglia, if you believe what you read in novels, isn't the person who distrusts signs, not the cool and clever intellectual, but the person who reads in order to believe, the full-on klutz. If novelists were characters, how much fun would novelists have with them? There they are, creating an object whose goal is to convince people of the reality of imaginary people who are themselves convinced, stupidly, by the reality of the novels they read. This is odd. He then also, in the longer New York Times one, writes about, which is, I mean, it is kind of an amazing thing, because like they're always making fun of like readers within the books. Like Freyson constantly is talking about readers. And we'll get to the Nabokov part in 1 second, but about like the readers who want X, Y, or Z, or need to relate, or reading their Twitter, or whatever. And it's just making fun of readers who are like essentially the people reading this book. And the other
but at the same time, we know we're special because we're reading this book.
Yeah, I suppose if you want to go in that direction. There is where is it? So in the other longer essays about the Emilio Renzi books that Piglia wrote, like the 3 volumes that were published in English, that were a journal, I mean, essentially a journal of a fictional character that's like that is like Piglia, standing for Piglia, but isn't Piglia, which again is very much like this book, that same sort of play. The fact that they're both Argentine is not entirely a coincidence. Then it talks a little bit about the people who did this, but has this great line from Piglia in which he says, the certainty that fiction depends not only on the person who constructs it, but on the person who reads. Fiction is also a position of the interpreter. Not that everything is a fiction, but everything can be read as a fiction. What is specific to Borges, if such a thing exists, is the capacity to read everything as a fiction and to believe in its power. Fiction is a theory of reading. It also writes, there's also a quote somewhere else about how he's constantly rereading his diaries because by rereading them, he realizes that they're not him. And he sees like the narrative techniques and the various representations of what that diary entry was, but as a form of fiction, not necessarily as a form of diaristic impulse.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly like all over this book.
Which is all over here, which I only use as an example that it's just like one stray aside in here even. Like it was just one where I was like, I don't know if this is a book or an essay or what it is. Should it be italicized or not? Like that sort of question. And then Googled and was like down a rabbit hole of like, oh, this book, this sort of position of Piglia and Piglia himself and his books themselves with their like stand-in detective for the author, all the different bits. I mean, that first novel is about the author going to research how his book came about, which is the history of Piglia. Like it's all like that twisty Macedonio Fernandez sort of vibe to it. And you can pull that one thing and then find that throughout here. And it's kind of like there's a mention, I'll find it as we go along, like a mention of how to read that's less about the thing in the instance, but more of where you go and how things are connected, the motifs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we've talked about on this podcast long ago in the past in relation to Infinite Jest, and the kind of rhizomatic reading of Infinite Jest and of books in general, of like more quote unquote postmodern books. We're not reading it for that plot of like the up and down or finding the symbols, but seeing the threads and the connections that sort of exist throughout and reading across the books and through them as like almost in a spatial way rather than in a solely like time sensitive, we learn this bit, we move to this bit happens next, chronological way, but something that's more motif driven, more, I don't know, to talk about it abstractly, more orchestral in a way. And that's kind of the fun part of reading Frazan, I think. Reading
absolutely. And it's, for me, I mean, I really enjoy that way of reading. I think it's just kind of how I go through my day in life, like how I'm just kind of understanding, like my understanding of any sort of, like, okay, I do dog training now. And like my understanding of dog training usually isn't as rigid as it could be, as I know how to explain all the details to get from point A to point B. That's not my greatest strength, but being more abstract and moving between different concepts and able to like help someone work through a new problem, as opposed to completely accurately detail how to get through the known predictable problem isn't my strength. And it feels like that's what I want in books, is books that you can't understand completely. I know I'm not smart enough to understand completely, or aren't really designed or written to be understood completely. Like you give me a book like that, and not only am I going to still not understand it completely, I'm also going to be really, really bored if there is a very rigid way to go through it. I'm not going to grasp the whole. I don't do well at grasping wholes. So even if the book is simple, I'm not going to grasp the whole, and I'm not going to enjoy the piecing together things along the way. Whereas if you give me a book like this, where like grasping the whole is out of the question for me, like it's just beyond, it's not going to happen. But there is so much to grasp and play with along the way. Like I love that. And it's interesting. Like one of the things I was thinking about listening back to the podcast is like you don't necessarily try to grasp the whole, but you really, really do like to try to unpack the structure and understand the structure and how that moves. And I really like listening to you do that, but like that is not me as a reader. Like I am just like completely lost in enjoying this detail and remembering that it connects to this other detail and maybe getting there, and just kind of swinging around through the structure is more my style. So it is interesting when you go off on like tight structure rants. I remember you did it with Ducks Newburyport. Like you really like to try to unpack how that is working. And I'm just like, I'm just and really enjoying the ride. And then I think it's probably in the first section of this one because it's about airplanes, but then again, it could be anywhere. But he's talking about how people accept that they don't understand how an airplane works and they still get on and go for the ride. But suddenly when it comes to art or books or music or whatever, film, they like get really frustrated when they don't feel like they understand it. And I'm like, I'm just here for the ride, man.
We've been talking that difficulty, what makes it things difficult for a while now, and this is like sort of a digression that ties back in. But with 3% has been sort of changing it. One of the things I started is a series of writing posts that are reading the Delkey archive. Like my goal, which is impossible, which is quixotic and stupid, would be to read each of the books and write something about each one. And see or reread them in many cases, but just to not even to see, just to like see what's there, to like find a way of like processing this kind of impossibly woolly fabric of literature into like something, to distill it into some things that are like that are of that moment and our reaction to it. And one of the ones, so the first thing I did is already online, is on Robert Ashley's Perfect Lives, which is an opera that was made for TV, which is and amazing, very strange. And so I'm trying to read about. It's like, for me, it required looking at the table of contents, which explained what each act was about in like succinct, sort of like, here's what's going on, here are the characters, and then read it and be like, okay, I love these lines, and I can see like where this all fits together. But it's kind of like talking about poetry, right? And like it's written to be heard, and in this case to also be filmed. So it's like not a book. But one of the things that's funny is that in the back there's a talk by Robert Ashley, or bits of talks that are put together, and he talks about how he did all 7 acts at once and essentially saw them as being simultaneous. And I was like, it's fucking invented part. It's the same thing. It's everything, like all simultaneously. They're all out of order. It's like all kind of digressive in various ways, but it's like, and then last night I was up way late, which is why I was texting you, because I wrote one that I'm really happy with that's on Juna Barnes' Rider, and that won't be out until a week from tomorrow. But the basic one part of it, and the basic part of it, and one that gets expanded upon, is that what makes reading Rider in particular difficult isn't the things that we think of most of the time with difficult literature. Maybe like one is that it could have socio-political views that you disagree with. It's like outside of your aesthetic, therefore it is difficult. It is not, neo-realistic, understandable. Sure. Then there's like the idea, like what you just referenced with Fragments and with these books, of the impossibility of seeing the whole. Like a Pynchon book is impossible to see as a whole, because there are just too many. I mean, because of a couple of things. There's too many characters, there's too many plot points, there's too many pages, there's too much to remember, but also because they're all like based in this kind of postmodern incompleteness theorem, where you can never contain everything, but you're trying to contain everything, so some things are left out. And in Juna Barnes has a bit of that, but also hers is just simply that like the sentences are set up so that you can't read them in the way that you read texts or other messages or communicative bits. They are set to be where you have to go on the ride. You have to let it digress and add and add and add and change and revise and add and go and just go with it, instead of trying to like understand like the core of it. You can find the core of it. It's easy enough, but the point of it isn't that. The point is that sort of bouncing journey, and that's very much like Fragments again, and very much like what you're talking about, of like just wanting to like go with the flow instead of trying to like dissect or like break it down into something, or see it as like a very concrete, realistic moment.
Yeah, and like one of the things that the way he does the sentence things specifically that I kind of noticed a lot this time around was how often, especially with the parentheses, but it's not always with parentheses, sometimes just with just a lot of commas. The bit around the parentheses will be kind of the concrete thing that you underline, and you're like, this sentence has meaning, and this is a nice philosophical statement, and that's that half, and that's that half, and then that makes this like witty, pithy epithet or whatever, like a line that's very quotable. And then everything in the middle is what makes it like soaring and fun and playful and engaging, and more than that, more than just a statement of philosophy, a statement about life. He has plenty of those, but there's this meat of the middle of them that is just play and enjoyment and pleasure, rather than just that simple statement of a sentence that I think most books would go with. Which, like, I don't mind them. If in most books I would find his sentence without the parenthetical middle and still think that was a smart, good sentence that I liked. But then in his, there's just all this other flavor to it that I really enjoy.
Totally agree. And there is I didn't really imitate Juna Barnes, but let go of trying to make things make sense and let that sort of accumulation factor happen. And that's kind of how my ADD works, of not, just bouncing around and oh yeah, add the, just keep adding to things. And it is super fun to write that way too. And it sort of resembles the way you think, which this really does. And speaking of going back to the readers for a second, there's that great part on page 381, in which Nabokov, at some provincial college, whatever, offers a test on what qualities one must have to be a good reader. And he warns that you have to choose 4 items from this list. And they are: a good reader should 1, belong to a book club; 2, should identify himself or herself with the hero or heroine; 3, should concentrate on the social economic angle; 4, should prefer a story with action and dialogue to one with none; 5, should have seen the book in a movie; 6, should be a budding author; 7, should have imagination; 8, should have memory; 9, should have a dictionary; and 10, should have some artistic sense. And the question is which 4 do you think are important to being a good reader? And they're all kind of grouped so that those bottom 4, imagination, memory, dictionary, artistic sense, are his clearly his preferred version, and that things like book club, identification of the hero or heroine, socioeconomic angle, story with action and dialogue are the worst sort of reader. And also in this world that we live in now, it's taking a page out of Frazan's elitist book, but that is the shit that people are into. That is that is the Twitterification of what reading is to represent the economic angle and to be something that people have, characters that people identify with.
Yeah, I think those two especially are the things that people seem to crave, and that don't. I don't care. And the thing is, they can be folded. I mean, that can be folded into the other 4. I mean, those can exist in a book without it dominating the book or without it being the book's aesthetic purpose. You can have a book with real aesthetic purpose that then has those things. One of the things that always, I know you feel the same way about Frazan, is that there's deep emotional content to this book, to this whole project, and not just because you have emotional relations to the things he references, and it sends you on your own emotional journeys to your personal connections to Pink Floyd or whatever, and those things that come up, but to the actual characters. I mean, this man who has a nephew that he can't bear to speak about, and he's trying to unpack that. That's deep emotional weight. He doesn't spend a ton of time in concentrated chunks expanding that, but it is almost always there. You forget it and then it just comes back up. And that emotional side of the book is something that if it wasn't there, I would still enjoy these books, but I wouldn't be enthralled with them the way I am if there wasn't serious emotional depth to them.
Right. Agreed. It's you don't have to count anything out necessarily, but the focus on is important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this one looks like, this section. But first, you mentioned the nephew that cannot be named, or he who cannot be named is usually how it's referred to in this book. But do you remember what the kind of ending status was of his nephew? What was the ending stories, or what were the stories in the earlier 2 volumes, since you reread them much more recently?
It hasn't, to my memory, been explicitly clear, but there is. My sense is that there is a night that he disappeared. And it seems to involve the beach in the woods as opposed to the beach in the ocean, the way it did for the author as a boy. So there are parallels. There definitely seems like there is something about the night the boy disappeared that both connects to that day on the beach, that the author, as the boy drowned, almost died, and then magically could read and write, and then also connected to that night, which is the night that the writer, the ex-writer, and Penelope and Uncle Hay Walrus are running around trying to save, but knowing the children knowing they can't save the parents. It seems like those are the bookends, not the bookends because they both happened before it, but those are like kind of connected emotionally to this single night, single day, single moment where things changed and someone wasn't there.
Yeah. Okay. So the second part, rather than the first one, which is basically like one extended monologue and conversation with the typewriter voice, this one comes in chunks that are generally under like headers like by way of beginning, what comes next, everything yet to come about what's already come to pass. One about how to be a good rememberer. There's the good reader how-to guide, which is the part because that Nabokov thing I was just talking about. There is 7 plots, ages, sins, souls, etc., which we'll talk about in a minute. But then there's like a kind of bit, like not necessarily an essay, but a sort of meditation on that kind of topic or that thing. So it's much less of like one monomaniacal, like verbal diuretic outpouring, and much more of like kind of contained bits that are still the same voice, the same sort of material being rehashed, but a new sort of form being placed on top of it.
Yeah, and often more. I mean, I feel like with each volume, he's often started to get more specific about things and really kind of narrow them down, or expand on them. Like it's a thing that he mentions earlier that just encompasses a sentence or two, and now by this point, when he goes back to it, it's like a full. This is how I feel about this, or this is how I think about this, or this is how I remember this event or whatnot. Like the reference, every time he returns to a reference, it gets expanded and detailed more and more made more concrete and more like not more traditionally novelistic, but moving in that direction of more straightforward readable, I guess.
Yeah.
Less mysterious, less about the absences. I mean, that's this book is shaped around absences, like all throughout there's the presence of absence in every one of these books, whether it's he should not be named or whatnot, and a lot of those
or simply the inability to write.
Yeah, a lot of the absences have gotten filled in. Things that in volume 1 are just an absence where you just see the shape of something missing, and then by this point you're like, okay, I know what the shape of that is. I know it fits into that shape. And I feel like that's kind of the direction the book has been moving is filling in a lot of those absences that you felt and could see the outline of, but didn't know what it actually contained or what used to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think of multiple choice tests?
Oh man, I enjoyed that section a bunch because like he's right, like every criticism of them is right, and how it limits you, and how it like the idea of everyone being right and wrong in the same ways.
That's a great line.
Yeah, that hit me. But as someone who did a good job of skating by in school without much effort and getting the grades and kind of just moving along, multiple choice tests were great for that.
They're the best.
I mean, if you really don't want to engage in the subject matter and you're halfway intelligent, oh man,
you can cruise.
Yeah, dude. Like I did. There are probably classes that I would have failed or had to just try harder, but because there was so much multiple choice, I was like, I don't have to do much. I can just kind of guess my way through this because it's
you can eliminate. So I ended up teaching like the GRE test before I ever took it, or working for Kaplan teaching like the LSAT and the MCAT and whatever else, because it's like the system of the multiple choice is brilliant. Like it's so much more fun than having to like know a thing and have to explain a thing. There was related, I'm just kind of going through this chronologically because I don't want to miss anything, but related to the earlier conversation about Renzi and Piglia, there's a bit on 370 where he talks about the warning in the opening pages of his impossible story, which is kind of the stand-in for the invented part, which is, quote, "And therefore, reader, I myself am the subject of my book. It is not reasonable that you should employ your leisure on a topic so frivolous and so vain. Therefore, farewell." So again, it's that confirming through absence, or like confirming to deny sort of bit of like, this is about me, but it's not me. Bye, I'm gone and off, which is
And
kind of like the core paradox of all of this.
I like the acknowledgement of it, potentially being frivolous and vain, which I think is lost in a lot of the autofiction that he slams. A lot of the I fiction that he slams is that there's a deeper self-obsession because it's more self-serious, and it's more I think it's self-serious without being acknowledging that it's frivolous and vain. Whereas I think this type of fiction that plays with the I is like, yeah, this is really self-indulgent, and I'm okay with that. Or I feel mixed feelings about that, but I'm gonna like play with those mixed feelings as opposed to just move forward concretely, seriously believing I've contributed something to life in the universe because I told a very straightforward, simply told story about myself and my importance.
Yeah, that inflates that. I found the bit that I was trying to find earlier about the rhizomatic stuff. It's on 378. I'm gonna butcher the shit out of this, and I hope every German in the world is listening.
Butchering is awesome.
What's that?
I said butchering's great.
Okay, so this is a bit from a word that was coined by Freud, and a letter that's the word is Nachschlichtige, which could be translated pretty close, which could be translated as retranscription. That was used to understand a particular memory as one of those longitudinal cross sections of the Earth's crust, with the different geologic layers representing the psychic achievements of successive epochs of life, which seems to me like both is a metaphor, a boring metaphor of like boring, like going down into the earth of that kind of layer upon layer upon layer, but also thinking of things not as like a moment in time or like an event that's just that moment in time, but that has those threads that go out to other surface places. And that reminded me of like the rhizomatic sort of structure of the book as well, that it is this concentric circles and these connective points and not just a straightforward ABC situation.
Which no, I can't. Where is it? There is a line, and he revisits it in this section about books essentially always. Rereading, you didn't just return to the book to be reread, but to all the other books that before, in one way or another, had led to that book, and to all the books that later that book had led you to. Books never stopped recalling books, remembering each other with affection and gratitude. I love that. Flash, I will kill you.
So we'll try and cut that part out, but I'm not very good at editing. This is right where the Piglia section is too. It says in reference to that last reader, Piglia classifies that that kind of reader as someone who experiences and enjoys, quote, a relationship between reading and the real, but also, quote, a relationship between reading and dreams, and who understands that, quote, in that double connection, the novel has plotted its history. A, quote, particular kind of reader, the visionary, one who reads to learn how to live, and who has understood that the novel, quote, seeks out its themes in reality, but finds a form of reading in dreams, which is also a very Faison-like thing, and brings me to like a question that maybe you can answer, or someone that's listening can answer. But on page 380, it says he remembered that and then thought about how, toward the end of his work in life, Piglia, writing with eyes wide open, hadn't managed to become the last reader, but had been the definitive reader. And he also remembered the other writer that he and Piglia had remembered simultaneously. Who is that?
That one I didn't know. Which is like, what page was that again? Sorry.
380. Sorry, 380.
It's above. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's so hard when he doesn't actually name the reference. You want to start unpacking it and get distracted by it. And it can send you. Like there have been so many times when like I think I know the reference, then I go Google, and then I'm on my phone for 20 minutes, which is my own frustrating problem. But it's a really fun experience. I mean, earlier in this It's in this volume where he's talking about. It's way earlier, but he's talking about remembering reading about jet lag, and I was sitting there being like, I know what he's talking about, and I can't quite remember what it is. And I was like, oh, it's either. I figured out it was either Bolaño or something else, and then I had to like Google it. And then as I was Googling it, I was like, oh, I've had this experience of being confused about this reference before, because while reading either Bolaño or Gibson, I did recall the other one talking about jet lag. And then while doing that, I find the article that I've previously read that is someone having the same experience of encountering these two jet lag lines. And Frazan's read both of them. Frazan references both of them. And
is
so
it in pattern recognition? Is pattern recognition?
Yeah, it's the opening of pattern recognition.
Yeah, the second and I was like, oh shit, that's right. That's exactly.
I don't know. I can't remember which of those books I've read first, so I don't remember which of those was the one that for me initially recalled the other. Which is just fun. And then to have this moment of like, I'm recalling both of them at the same time because of this book and trying to unpack which I'm meant to be recalling. I'm like, no, I think he wants us to recall both. I think he knows that like certain readers are going to recall both in this moment.
Absolutely. There's another other one that I don't know the reference to that I hope someone else does is on 383. Maybe you do. My sense of the past is vivid and slow. I hear every sign and see every shadow. And quote, I lived so many centuries, everybody is still alive. A colleague of his had once written, a made in the USA madman from the South with a palindrome last name.
It's Barry Hannah, isn't it?
Oh, Hannah is a palindrome, isn't it?
Yeah. And Barry Hannah showed up in, I think, in the
over and over again.
And did he ever name? He did name him there, right?
Yeah. If he didn't, we talked about it. We talked about the story and.
I almost feel like
I don't know why I didn't think of that as a palindrome at first. I was like thinking of 4-letter names.
Well, what's funny is, I mean, I was partially when I read that, I went to the palindrome as like the way of landing on it. But what helped me get there was remembering from the invented part that Barry Hannah had showed up there, and it just kind of like really fell together. This because the Madman from the South is what kind of sent me back to the invented part more, which helped me get to the Barry Hannah.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense.
So in one of the maybe the first episode of the season, you mentioned how much wind is showing up, and then I since then have just been like, oh my god, wind is all over the place, like wind. And
you texted that real quick. You texted me that, and I have zero recollection of saying that anything.
Really? Oh man!
After you texted me, I was like, "Holy shit, you're right! It's all over here."
You didn't go anywhere with it, and I don't know what. No, but I mean, I some of the stuff you'd have nowhere to go with, and like, I think the referential mania that Frazan puts in the books triggers your own referential mania, and a book that for me is never referenced in these books. I've talked about this before, like. Part of my reaction to these books recalls my reaction to reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when I was a kid, and just that it like really let me know that fiction could do other stuff, like just having dialogue tags that make fun of the dialogue or the person speaking. To me, was just like, wait a minute, it can be more than she said, he said, while putting down a cup or whatever. Like the way that the narration of that book, that series, is constantly undermining itself has always reminded me of this in a much simpler, more childish, playful, comedic way.
I really was growing up, and I remember one scene specifically. I haven't read them, in 30 years easily, but more than that. But regardless, the one thing I remember is the one character being put into like the ultimate torture chamber, in which you see your significance in relation to the entirety of the universe and time's infinite space. And then like it just breaks you instantly. And the person comes out and is like, yeah, it's like fine. I'm like the center of everything. But I remember thinking like, holy shit, that's the most existential nightmare scenario you can imagine. Like you are a speck of dust in a galaxy of sandstorms or whatever.
But like what the one thing I started to try to make sense of with wind in this one is that like falling imagery has always been in these books, like throughout all three, falling,
Well,
and
Ella's always falling into the pool. She falls
falling
into
into the pool. It's not usually called falling, not expressly named as falling in these books, but you know, the disappeared people who were tossed out of helicopters is falling.
That's the section that this is that I'm looking at right now with the wind in it. Yeah.
And yeah, I think he doesn't call it falling there, but he references wind. And so like wind is part of falling. If you're falling, you're going to experience wind. So that is like a thing that's been playing in my head with these books. And then Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of the scenes I've always remembered and loved is a whale is conjured into existence out of nowhere and is falling to a planet. And as it's falling, it's thinking. And one of the things it does while it's falling is name the feeling it's feeling around itself as wind. And I'm like, oh my God, like, there we go. There's more of that. And then a whale shows up in this book too. A beach whale shows up in this book too. I'm like, for as far as I'm concerned, that is fine. It is a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference in my brain.
That's funny. There's another, the whale part always reminds me of the short story. Oh my God, what's the author's name?
Yes.
That Will Vanderheiden translated for the anthology we did, 1,000 Forests from One Acorn. That is an Argentine writer, and all of a sudden a whale appears above this smaller town in Argentina and is dropping, and it describes like the entirety of like what's going on and what happens to its organs and the wind just evaporating the water, all the kind of stuff, all that fun stuff, and it's so specific as it's plummeting. That's what I always think of, and that goes back to it's all connected, man.
And you guys
only connect, as he says in here, only connect.
You guys discussed that story when you had Will on in the first season.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Not detailed. It's mentioned. Oh, maybe it might be with it's either with Will or when you had Valerie Davis on, or maybe both. You reference it.
Miles. That's funny. Like we're just phrase on anyways. We're just repeating ourselves in different formats and revising and changing. But it's only one podcast, man. It's just one podcast. Infinite number of like little variations. I've had one original thought in my life.
And I don't know. I mean, everything's connected, and like your life becomes reading this book. Your life becomes a reference to this book. Like one of the things I've been doing to make Florida life bearable is going to these really wonderful natural springs where the water's perfectly clear and it's 72 degrees all year long, and they're great, and some of them are pretty deep. And I've just been going and sinking sometimes, like thrusting myself down and just letting myself think, and basically just thinking of love and death and nothing else, and just kind of going further each time. And then this volume has plenty of sinking imagery. It's different than the drowning imagery. And there's been the swimming underwater with your eyes, readings like swimming underwater with your eyes closed or whatnot. And yes, this is 378. And yes, you had to learn how to swim below and touch the bottom and to hold your breath and to breathe deeply in the depths. But doing so knowing that if you went too deep at a certain point of no return, the human brain convinces itself that it has amphibious abilities and removes the diving suit and drowns wearing the most superficial of smiles. And I'm like, that's what I've been doing. That's like how I've been passing the time in my life. And I was doing that like while reading the dream part, which I don't really recall that type of imagery in the dream part as much. And then I'm reading this book. I'm like, oh, this is kind of what I've been doing. That's fun.
That's so perfect. It is like it ties in everything. I know that you're shorter. You have a stronger time than I do, and I do want to talk about the 7 plot thing in a second. And maybe that's a good ending point. But one thing I need to get out. I need to get this off my chest. And it's both funny. It will. There's a part that I'm not having a hard time finding right now online, but that will annoy certain people. But on page 402, there's a line that it's talking about like the translation of stuff, blah, 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 and the French. It's more the French have that disturbing and despotic mania of changing the original title of everything. Now, okay, so we're in Latvia. There is those Captain Underpants books that Alex is at the age to read. And the name of the author, as we all know, is Dave Pilkey, right? Or something like that. That is not how it's spelled or pronounced or looks in Latvian. They changed the names of the authors so that they're more pronounceable by Latvian standards. So it's like crazy looking. It looks nothing like that. And I was like, this is insane. Like this is nonsense. There's no, like, if we did that as Americans, if we were like, oh well, you're Kristaps Porzingis, we're going to change the way that it's spelled because we can't pronounce Porzingis. Or the one that I find offensive that's also basketball related is Nikola Jokic. They call Joker because they don't know how to say Jokic. That's annoying and seen as like imperialistic and so on and so forth. But yet it is a common feature of this part of the world to just change everyone's name. So James Joyce is not spelled James Joyce. It's with a D and a Z, like at the beginning. And I'm like, this is like infuriating to me. And Kaya sent then after I was like bitching about it, and she's like, no, it makes sense because that's how people can pronounce it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Fine, whatever. Like, we'll just start changing everything to English pronunciations, just make it, how I want it so that nobody has any confusion, which is seen as extraordinarily offensive. But she found this, I'll find a link to it, Instagram reel of these two people talking about Star Wars. And in Scandinavia, all the names of Star Wars characters are the same, except in Iceland.
Yeah. That's what I was going to talk about. He has a ton of reels about like Iceland. What'd you do now? They apparently have some of the most really bizarre renamings.
Like Darth Vader is like Blackhead or something like that. It's like just totally different. Totally different.
But on that same page in that same bit, did you notice the French title for A Hard Day's Night?
No.
It's a little bit further down. It's a Quatre Garçons dans le Vent. As in wind. just some more wind showing up.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. All the wind. Carl 9000 is like Hal 9000.
I'm trying to find it now, and I'm failing. This section does, at some point in these pages, he does reference ERC 24, right? UR 24
from Philip K. Dick.
Oh, that is Philip K. Dick. I was thinking.
Yeah,
okay, when I googled it, if you go, I think I googled it with his name maybe, and Bottom of the Sky came up in Spanish, like a Spanish essay on Bottom of the Sky, and I was like, part of me thinks that like that this book in a way takes place in the parallel universe. Like it is like there's one of the times when he sees Villamatas with the unnamed friend that's Bolaño, he references wondering if like there's an alternate universe where his life is more like that, where he has the wife and the kids, and that's more like what Frezan's life would be like. So it almost feels like that this book is set as like not just an imagined alternate version of Frezan, but like an actual alternate universe existence of Frezan.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of, have you read the Catherine Lacey book, Biography of X?
No.
That's an alternate timeline of America, very like Otter Arter sort of setup of like how things were just different from like a point onwards. And in this case, it's like a biography of this like transgressive Kathy Acker-esque sort of artist. I've only read like, I don't know, maybe a quarter of it, but it's really interesting, but it has that same sort of feeling of like this destabilized sense of history and reality that allows things to happen. And this book totally seems like he could have entered into maybe he's all still in the Hadron Collider. Like it's all still.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to mind that this actually that he did actually get in there, and that this is all that what it is. And Frezan, beyond just his own work, Bottom of the Sky deals with parallel universes, and Philip K. Dick, one of his constant references, does. And then, as you point out, Ada like that is a parallel universe that has moments of glimpsing ours. So I'm like waiting for a moment in this book where it like glimpses ours. Who knows?
And how is it not? Yeah, exactly. So those seven, just to sort of sum up with this, the 7 plot thing is interesting because when you always talk about, and Brian's talked about these sort of like the traditional 2 plots to a story: a stranger comes to town, or stranger leaves town, or person leaves town, and that sets everything in motion one way or another. And here we have like the book called 7 Capital Scenes, in which it says that there are 7 plots that encompass everything. 1, vanquishing the monster. 2, rags to riches. 3, the search, 4, the comedy, 5, the tragedy, 6, the rebirth, and 7, the journey from dark to light. But that's not it, or not, because he was missing the most important plot of all. Plot number 8, which for him was like the undesirable yet so attractive 8th passenger, devouring the previous plots one by one. The plot that asked itself what was happening and what can I do to get out of here and go over there, or vice versa. The plot that asked itself about the other plots as it assimilated and digested them. The meta plot inside of which everything else fit. And that gives me cause that you could play a game with this of going through every one of these 7 things, and they are all these 7 plots are in this trilogy in one way or another, almost simultaneously. It's funny that there are 7 parts to the invented part. The 7 number has obviously like always been is extraordinarily religious and is like a framing device for any number of things, and is like a facile way of like grouping. There's 7 types of people. There's 7 types of this. There's 7 whatever. Fine, but like within this particular rubric, there are like you could come up with vanquishing the monster, rags to riches as Penelope becoming, the superstar. Mm-hmm. The search is for he who cannot be named. The comedy of like his rants or whatever. The tragedy of he who not can be named's passing, going away. The rebirth of like his going in the ocean, coming out as a writer. The journey from dark to light, of maybe trying to like redeem himself. Like all these are kind of components of every plot. So there's not just one plot, but it is like all of the plots all at once, and that kind of 8th plot that consumes everything and pieces them all into like one sort of, again, I'm just going to stick with symphony because I'm like in a musical mode today. So like that sort of way of like looking at things both spatially and like in a 4-dimensional way. He's playing some 5-dimensional chess, to use everyone's favorite metaphor.
It is some 5-dimensional chess. Yeah, I mean, I agree. And you don't even have to identify those specific those 7, the 7 links you made don't have to be the 7 links you make. Those right. 7 plots can be linked to like any number of other stuff in these books. Which is, I don't know. Yeah, the pieces in the whole, like that he's often referencing, there's 3s throughout the book, all of the books, like endless times we just list 3 things in a row, like endless times. And then all the books, Invented Part has 7 parts, but it also has 3 parts. There's like the 3 main parts, and same with these 2 volumes, all have the 3 parts. But he's also often talking about a 4th part, or an overarching part. Like there is a whole, there is a next part that is the whole, and it's always kind of just out of reach, but really it's still there and it's still immensely important.
Yes, absolutely. So do you have a favorite line from this section as I try and find out what we're reading for next week?
I think I was going to go, that's too far. I went too far. I'm trying to figure out. So he's talking about the collage. He goes on about the collage, which, he's initially talking about it as in school. Like you make those little collages with the little glue. But so 421, where do I want to start it? Because it just goes on. Thus continuing to believe and continuing to create, thus understanding or not understanding everything in slivers and shards and fractions and details, with no time given to contemplating the totality of everything. The whole thing, the whole collage section is something that I was like, yes, this is what this book is. This is how I'm reading, and this is my experience of this book is as a collage.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's written that way for sure. I think the one that I'll choose for now, there's so many good ones. There's so many that I'd marked, but was I just had it and I just lost it. Is where he's talking about VCRs, because I was a VCR kid, obviously, and as I'm old, and like when we got a VCR, we'd like tape shit, and you set the timer, and like you fucked up, or if the show started a minute earlier, a minute late, it was always wrong. But you had to tape everything because it was just never going to be there again. I remember having to make those decisions between like, there's new TV shows coming out in the fall, and which ones are going to be good, and I don't want to miss the good one by choosing a shitty one, and can you only tape so much, and how is this going to happen? And so like when something aired and you didn't tape it, it was just never to be seen again for so long. So this whole bit of like, you wait for it and you think about it. Like, I mean, it used to be like the ritual of watching Sound of Music every year, or Wizard of Oz, or like whatever it was, because they were only on like at certain points in time. And there was that. So like he's relating that, and he says, talking about the VHS tapes and so on that don't even exist and didn't exist yet, much less the possibility of typing the name of a film online and be able to watch it right then and there. So wanting so badly to be able to watch them again, awaiting the return, movies were imagined. You daydreamed them, you corrected and added to and improved them, which I think is this book and so much other things. So much I love like concepts of memory and how memory functions. And this book in particular, I mean, obviously the remembered part, but like the idea of like, I'm asking you, like, what happened exactly to like Penelope or to like the kid? Like, I know that there are scenes that evoke and reference it in the earlier books, but I'm always just kind of reconstructing them as we're going along, remembering them, adding to them, changing them based on other information, just like recreating this like Lego land of like his bits and pieces and rants and beliefs and occurrences over and over again, that he builds up and tears down, builds up and tears down. When you go back to think of like the actual thing, you're kind of reconstructing it out of like all these kind of little bits and pieces.
Because he never gave you the actual thing most of the time.
Generally not.
Only able to do that. I loved that bit. The two things I took away from that bit when I read it was, one, bring it back to Star Trek. What year did it end? I forget what year Star Trek Next Generation ended, but I was young.
Apparently the answer to that is never.
Oh, well, come on. So I was young, and I remember I have this memory of I was somewhere with my dad, and I wanted to be home in time to watch that, and we parked, and I'm sprinting into the house, slamming the TV on, slamming the VHS to start recording and start watching. And so for years, my entire recollection, my entire memory, my entire watching of that, because I watched it again and again and again, was missing the first minute. Like, it wasn't until my friends had the DVDs in like my 20s that I finally saw the actual full episode of the final episode of Star Trek, which I'd seen 20 times. And I'm sitting there watching this now for the first time, seeing that first minute, which is crazy.
I think we've had this weird conversation before, and maybe we're reconstructing this too.
Totally possible. But the other thing it reminded me of, and this is like it's one of those things of this book making me like just remember my life a little more and enjoy the past a little more, was in middle school. One of my buddies, who's now weirdly very internet famous, which has been very strange.
Is it Salt Bay?
Is it what? No, it's not Salt Bay. It's Germa. Look up Germa. You may have seen him on I discovered he was it's like cult internet famous, like YouTube, like people who do YouTube. There's a certain like cult for him. But I discovered that he had become famous when he made it to the front page of Reddit, where there was a fake headline of AI generates like face of all serial killers, and it's him. And I'm like, why the fuck am I seeing a friend from middle school on Reddit as the face of all serial killers? It was really strange. But he and I, one day, I had this memory, like, we love Spaceballs, we love reenacting things, we love like doing whatever. And we were in the boys' bathroom in our middle school with like probably 10 other kids just acting out scenes of Spaceballs, because this is a way of sharing this. Like, people know this thing or haven't seen it or have only seen pieces of it and they don't own the VHS, they don't own the DVD. So sure, these two kids have memorized like a ton of the movie, so like let's just have them act out scenes. Like, they're literally calling out scenes. We're like, okay, we can do that one. Like, it was wild. That's no, I mean, now it would just be everyone staring around their phone. Oh, hey guys, the scene from this movie, let's look at it. It was so much better. And like, I just don't know how it happened. Like, how do we get like 10 other, like, how do we all know that we were going to do this performance? Because there were a bunch of kids in there with us, and they couldn't all been from the exact class we were just like taking a bathroom break from. So that was a fun memory I hadn't thought of in years that section made me think of.
Man, that's super funny. That's super funny. So, Virgo, anything that you want to plug or talk to?
No, I have nothing, Chad. I'm just a dog trainer in Florida. I got nothing going.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna finish reading this and write about it for next month. But I'm frozen. The Book of Jokes by Momus. It was Nick Curry, Scottish musician. This novel is so ready to get canceled for so many reasons, and I find it hysterical. It's like the core concept is that this family's entire life, or the narrator's entire life with this family, is basically dictated by and predicated upon really dirty and inappropriate, awful jokes. Nice. And the thing that's wonderful, it's a wonderful premise. There are jokes in here that you kind of heard in other variations, but it ties into Fragment in a sense that it's kind of the variation. It's like the Aristocrats. Like it's the constant like retelling of these jokes that you know the core of, because most jokes are the same, but like in new and different ways. But there's also the bit that I think is I live my life by, of like where it just runs a joke into the ground, and every time it's just so much funnier. To me, I think
for the person running the joke into the ground, it gets funnier and funnier. For everyone else, it's more and more miserable.
Oh, I don't know, man. There's one in here. I don't want to give. I mean, it'd be a spoiler to give away like the recurring joke, but every time it pops up, I just start laughing because it's like a variation on the same thing over and over again. But love that book. Anyways, so next week we'll be back on Wednesday. Brian theoretically will be back for everyone who is missing him. And we will be going over pages 422 to 490. And I'll have the announcement about the time and all that kind of stuff later. Otherwise, you can always listen to us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. I don't even know where people do that anymore. Rate and review us when you're there downloading stuff. Tell your friends. Encourage everyone to buy Fragrant's books, which are 3 for $40 on the Open Letter website at this point in time. Get the 3, catch up, listen to the podcast, enjoy life, remember things well. And any words of wisdom from Florida, Patrick?
I got nothing. For your reference to cancelability made me remember what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to shoehorn a Quebec writer into this. Who I mentioned him to you briefly, Victor Levy. I can't remember how to say his last name, but he's very cancelable in his personal opinions and things he said. His texts themselves, as far as I know, the ones I've read they're not nothing cancelable in them. But he has it was a biography / fictional biography / him his personal life while writing this biography of Melville while doing critical theory on Melville. But like, I mean, it involves things like him having a dream where he is walking around with Melville, basically paralleling Moby Dick being Ishmael, but Ishmael is also there. And it's kind of endlessly strange and very, very Fragment. So if anyone's able to get their hands on some copies of Monsieur Melville, you'll probably have a good time if you like Fragment, although it's very different. But playing similar games and definitely has a lot of his own vitriol, although his is, I think, a little more less playful, a little more straightforwardly vitriol.
A little more Montreal, a little more Quebecois. So just to reference that, the Melville book that is sort of referenced in here and is forthcoming next summer, theoretically. So stay tuned for that. And you go play with your dogs, Patrick.
Yeah, you gotta get them out.